forget to do.
Very good. Yeah, you guys are making me one of the cool kids, and I'll take that. So, especially when you're my age, you've been around this long. No, yes, real quick, I'm gonna throw up my slides real quick. At least my opening slide. Make sure you guys can see it. How are we doing?
Perfect. I can see it.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So some of us have been in orals for a long time. Orals has changed over the last couple of decades. And probably some of the most significant changes have come through the FAR RFO. Okay, it's just basically it's FAR 2.0. They're doing all kinds of experimentation. Um, just to kind of let you know, too many people have a wrong view of the FAR. The FAR is not law; it's regulation, but it's a support law. Okay. And GSA and other agencies are taking a look at the FAR and saying, okay, how can we now begin to streamline acquisition? We're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into some of the acquisition slides. And you can roll your eyes if you want to. It might be a review, but it's important for folks to understand how acquisition really works, okay, and how business development really works because they are nicely aligned. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the things I really wanted to bring out real quick is that with the new kind of taking a look at FAR and how can we streamline acquisitions and whatnot, what we're finding out is that, especially in phase solicitations, orals is going to become a component to, I guarantee, 80% of the solicitations that are out there. So the acquisition strategies are going to include orals. And there's a reason for it. And we'll get to what that reason is for. Um, I can cheat. Okay, see, this is what happens. A rabbit jumps up and I chase the rabbit, and that's just the way it is. But when we get into your written proposals, folks, we're in the world of AI now. We really are. I mean, basically, proposals, you can take the solicitation itself. They'll take a look at sections L, M, C, and H and write your proposal for you in an hour. Okay. As long as it's got a library of your past performance, your corporate experience and your past performance. But in orals gives you something different. This is not, I can't use AI for orals, maybe to help me with my dialogue. But the idea is that they're really evaluating you as a company. And we always talk about what's compliant, what's compelling, what's convincing. Okay. And so in orals, really, your presentation slides themselves are your compliance part. But guess what? Compelling, convincing is your team. And that's really what they're looking at. So as coaches, we have to adjust a little bit. We're seeing all kinds of crazy orals formats. Wow, we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. But we have to adjust. And so yeah, so that's what this is all about. A little bit about me. Like you said, I started in the industry back in 1970. We don't talk about how old I am, okay? But I used to work on wire wrap backplanes. Just to let you know, I was the youngest field engineer for Northern Telecom, carried a tool bag and worked on computers at 18. Kind of grew up in the industry, working on operating system development. When you get a little bit older, they throw you into program management. I managed some very large programs. I supported GSA for maybe 22 years as a contractor. They just kept bringing me on. Supported three presidential transitions. And then I get to the certain age and say, okay, you're now business development. What resulted in that was me working for a very large company, got immersed in business development framework called Shipley. Some of you know what Shipley is. Went back to small business and realized the small business doesn't have anything. So we had to figure out something for small business. I make a joke in my book that small business really runs their business development a methodology called BONSOP. I don't know if you ever heard of BONSOP before, but it really represents this. This is the how the process works. Back of a napkin, seat of your pants. Okay. So if you ever hear the term BONSOP, that's what it means. It's actually a 70s term, but the idea is that small business really didn't have anything. And we also began to understand that small businesses made the same mistakes, or large businesses actually make some of the same mistakes small businesses do. It's not whether you can do the work, it's whether you can win the work. And that becomes the key question. Okay. Well, we've done this before and we can do this and we can do that. Yeah, it doesn't matter, but you got to take a look at the solicitation itself. Can you actually win this work? Do you got the corporate experience to do it? Do you have the past performance to do it? I just did something. I don't know if some of you picked up on it. the government has separated corporate experience from past performance. It gives them two factors to be able to evaluate you on. Okay. So we're seeing some major changes. What they're doing is they're saying, okay, we want to now take a look at these companies a little bit different. Okay. Um, and honestly, I've worked with some small businesses. If you looked at their web pages, you would think that they were major, giant systems integrators because they do everything. And it's a staff of five. The government's getting to the point where they're trying to weed out a lot of that stuff. Okay. So with that said, let's jump in. This is actually part of a class that I teach. Okay. This class has been taught. It's corporate class has been taught around the industry. It's also been taught at George Mason University, Schar School of Policy and Government. So yes, this is, so what I've done is I've tried to strip some things out. What would normally be 2 hours, 3 hours, we're going to try to do it in 45 minutes. So if I go fast, I'm already talking fast. But if I go fast, just please forgive me. And honestly, guys, this is in a workbook. I can send you the workbook. It's got a bunch of other slides in it. So you just let me know. I'll be more than happy to send it out. Okay. Anyway, so I had the opportunity to develop a business development framework for small business. We talked about that a little bit. I went out to GovWin IQ's, actually Deltec. They have their convention conference every year, and I was keynote for small business. And I put together business development for small business. It started out to be a class. We pitched it. Somebody came to me and says, "Mike, you need to make that a book." So that was my first attempt at writing. Okay. No, AI didn't write my book, but I did use Grammarly. And when I ran my first chapter through it, I had 800 errors. I almost gave up. And I just had to learn how, okay, let me use this tool the right way. And we got it done. So the first book came out. It's called In Pursuit of Business Development Life Cycle. So what we did was we took business development from a framework, turned it into a life cycle. And that was kind of the genesis of all this. The next book was Coaching Orals as part of the In Pursuit process. And I also worked with, and some of you may know her. Her name is Gloria Parker. Gloria was the first CIO at Education, first CIO at HUD, first female CIO, first African American CIO, and she is a delight to work with as a teacher. And I helped her write her book. So we've been teamed up ever since, and we do an awful lot of training in the industry right now. So anyway, so this is what we try to do is take coaching orals and how can I break it down and make it as simple as possible. And the idea was to come up with the 4 Ps: plan, prepare, practice, and present. And let me give you the ending before we get there. By the time we get to present day, this is what I want, just like we practiced. They go into game day and they're nervous as all get out. But guess what? When you get in there, you're going to be so prepared that this is just another practice, okay? Because we're going to actually drill those things in. We'll talk a little bit about that. I want to say this too, and you might hear me say this a lot. This is not about entertainment, it's about how the brain works, okay? And once you figure out how the brain works, it's how you present certain things. What I want is I want to engage the brain, and we're gonna talk about that in a little bit, okay? I talked for 5 minutes and haven't got off the title slide, so you know this is going to be a long day. Okay, so let's go. All right. All right. So really what I want to do is I want to take a look at, what is this business development world? Okay, what fits where? Business development really is about, building relationships with the customer. Anybody tells you it's not about relationships is lying to you because it really is about relationships. Um, you need to understand how budgets work. You need to understand how things flow through the federal government. And a lot of that is the acquisition world, but we'll get around that. But business development is the front end of all of this. Okay. And it's about building relationships. We get into the capture process. Okay. Capture, it has to answer the question. So business development basically says, is this something that we can pursue? Okay. Capture really has to answer that question. Once we get to qualifying, we have to answer the question, can we win this work? Okay. And when you move into capture, capture is how do we win this work? And so there's processes to go through. We talk about, some of you are going to understand, we talk about gate reviews. Okay. When you get to a gate review, you've got to get through that gate. There's certain questions you have to answer. Well, before we even get into capture, qualify has to answer that question. Can I win this work? And I remember, I would tell a story. I have a ton of stories, by the way. That's the gray hair in me. But I remember my first presentation to a large business. And I made a presentation. It was for GSA. I came out of GSA. I knew GSA inside and out. And I got done with my presentation. I was so proud of myself. I mean, I did everything they needed me to do. And I got up there and I noticed that one of the execs was squirming a little bit. He wasn't quite convinced. And I said, okay, when he gets to Q&A, I'll be able to answer his question. And he said, and when he got to him, he goes, Mike, I got a question to ask. And he asked me, he goes, do we have the past performance to win this work? And I was like, I knew I had the perfect answer. I said, sir, I've been supporting them for so long. I know this inside and out. He goes, you did not answer my question. Do we have the past performance to win this work? BD 101, and I failed. Okay. And that's where I learned that there are very key things that we don't think about as we're moving through the process. Okay. So capture is important. And then we get into service delivery, and I always open up this section is you won the contract, now what? Okay. And people don't realize that business development is a big part of service delivery. Um, you can win or lose your recompete day one of the contract. You got to learn how to got a solid transition process. I'm not going to get into transition. That's a whole nother hour that we could talk about. But again, it's when you kick off and how you run this program that's a big part of business development. People don't realize this. Okay, I'm going to chase a rabbit because I'm there. Okay, business development's got three legs. Okay, net new business. Duh. Okay. That makes perfect sense to me. Okay. You have your recompetes. Duh. That makes good sense to me. Expanding and the idea of organic growth. Okay. Well, organic growth and your recompetes have a big part of your service delivery. And people tend to forget the fact that two of the three legs in business development sit in service delivery, if that makes sense. Okay. So we have to be sensitive to that type of thing. Now, behind all of this, okay, is this world called acquisition, government acquisition. And when we teach this, we have a gentleman who's a former SCS 1102. He's a delight to listen to. If you ever get a chance, look up Williams Whiteboard on LinkedIn or YouTube, and you will be amazed at the energy this guy has. His name is William, and I'm going to come back to him because I want to talk about something about his personality, which is amazing. Okay. All this is captured in books. I don't need to go into all of this. These are our books and our classes. Okay. Now let me get into orals. Say, yes, he's finally getting there. Okay. No, I'm not going to quote the FAR. What's the word? I'm going to give you a narrative of the FAR. Okay. Um, FAR 15102 basically says this. I'm not going to quote it, but I'm going to paraphrase it. Okay. Anything other than your pricing can be done with orals. Okay. Orals can replace anything written. Now, there's an implication in there. Okay. You need to understand something is that when you're doing your orals presentation, anything that comes out of your mouth is binding. Okay. And a lot of people don't understand that is that we have to, especially during Q&A, and when we drill Q&A, there's certain things we've got to be careful of when we're answering questions because you don't want to commit your company to something they weren't prepared to commit to. Okay. So I had a gentleman one time I was coaching, and when I quoted this, I said, everything you say is binding. He was like, I don't want to be in orals. It just scared him to death that what came out of his mouth could commit the company. And we're nervous about that. He did fine. We worked through all that kind of stuff. But I understood because he felt the weight of this. And I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that whatever comes out of our mouth, okay, is binding. And I don't need to repeat that anymore. Okay. So when we get into orals, okay, so there's a couple of things in orals that we have to remember. Um, and we actually, when we talk about plan, prepare, practice, and present, there's two sides to this. There is the teaching of the rules of the game, and then there's coaching the game. Okay. The teaching of the rules of the game, we go into that to the first couple of process areas, plan and prepare, and then we really get into coaching. And I'm gonna say this right away, teaching and coaching, you need both. Okay. You need somebody who understands the rules and someone who can coach you through the process. Um, I had one of my clients one time and he basically said, I'm like, I'm just going to buy your book. I said, okay, I'll make my $4.50 off my book. That's fine. And I told him, I said, while you're at it, I want you to buy a book on how to play basketball. And I says, it's going to teach you how to do a layup, jump shot, what the rules of the games are, how to block, box out, all that kind of stuff. But then I'm going to put you in the game. Let's see how well you do. Okay. So the issue is that you need to have that coach too, because they're sitting back and they're actually watching how this thing is playing out and they're adjusting you. They kind of understand. We pick up on quirks, we pick up on things that are just bad habits, and we try to coach those out. I tell people you don't, in basketball, You don't lay up with your right hand coming off your right foot. It just looks awkward and weird. Okay. So that's what a coach does. He teaches you how to execute the way you're supposed to execute. So I hope that makes sense a little bit. You kind of need both sides of this. You got to understand the rules of the game, and at the same time, you got to have a coach that can coach you through it. Okay, and that's important. A lot of companies have internal coaches. That's great. That's good because they understand the culture of the company and all that kind of stuff. Um, there was an important point I wanted to make, and it's going to come back later. This is my gray hair coming in, but I just as we move forward, if it comes back, I'm gonna let that rabbit jump up, and I'll answer that question. Okay. Oh, here it is. See, I didn't have to do that. Here's the dirty secret about orals. Okay. Look, they got your slides. Okay. They've got your slides. That's your compliance. That got you in the gate. Okay. Your pass fail sometimes are key personnel, keep your KPQM. Sometimes it's your corporate experience. But the idea is they've got the slides. The orals is about evaluating you. Okay. And that's another thing that scares people a lot. What they're looking at is this. Okay. And we're going to talk about presentation styles in a minute. Um, can I work with this team? This is what the temp are looking for. Can I trust my program with that bid PM? And the bid PM is your most compelling. I had a FedSim guy, a very close friend of mine. I'm actually working with him now here in Tampa. When he came out of FedSim, he was one of the folks that looked at the manuscript in my book. And he says, Mike, let me tell you something. The most important thing in orals is your bid PM. Matter of fact, your most important thing in your proposal is your bid PM because that's the person that they're going to have to go to. So those are the things in orals we're trying to do. They're going to look for things like, does that PM trust his team? So you have the rest of your KPs. So we work on things like making sure that Q&A, your PM is not answering everything. You got best of breed people. How do they work with one another? Do they, this is going to sound funny. Do they genuinely like each other? That comes across. Okay. So those are important things when you're going into orals. Okay. All right, here's another little bit. Just stay with me for 5 minutes. Talk a little bit about the here is a classic at the very top. This is your business development process. Okay. And if identify, qualify, capture proposal, post proposal, post award. Okay. Then you move into your service delivery. If you look at the line underneath of it, that is your supply chain line. Got demand generation. Part of business development is doing demand gen, creating the opportunity. Okay. So they kind of everything goes all the way down to service delivery, demand fulfillment. So this is really kind of cool the way all this stuff works. So we go through them. It's a discovery phase, it's a knowledge phase. You're operating on knowledge. Now you're in preparation. Watch this. Now, this is the federal acquisition lifecycle. This is a simplified version. I put this together 6 years ago. You're going to find this diagram, at least that part of it, in several publications because it's a simplified version of how the acquisition lifecycle, federal acquisition lifecycle works. And it lines up perfectly with your business development lifecycle. Okay. There's a thing called PALT. You just need to understand this. Some of you can raise your hand saying, I've been there. When was the last time you asked the contracting officer for an extension? They got mad at you. Okay. Well, the reason why they got mad at you is because their scorecard is based on when the solicitation is released to the time it's awarded. Okay. Anytime that shifts, it impacts their bonuses. Okay. You're basically hitting their money, their pocketbook. So they don't like that. Okay. So everything lines up. If you understand the acquisition life cycle, you understand business development life cycle, everything kind of lines up. Okay. There are two areas where there's opportunity that is in the beginning. Can you tell I'm on a Mac? I'm sorry. You got the balloons. I can do all kinds of things. It gets really cool. Anyway, I missed that one. Anyway, so you have opportunity, got opportunity, demand gen. And then remember we talked about during service delivery, those are two opportunities for you to extend and expand, okay, and make sure you're going to win your recompetes, okay. We get into market research. People don't understand. They get them all messed up. Market research documents are very simple. Request for all worked on RFIs, okay. RFI is kind of one of those catch-all. We can use RFIs for pretty much anything, but it really is about when market information, the surety is low. We don't quite know what's out there, and what we're going to do is we're going to find out, oh, by the way, respond to this RFI with your questions or your suggestions because they're trying to figure this stuff out, okay? Source of SALT really is a friend of mine, he explains it this way. The RFI gives you a piece of Swiss cheese. Source of salt lets you pack in those holes in the cheese so you have a solution. Typically, you see teaming happening after the RFI. By the time you get to your source of salt notification, you got your teams that they're together. I know I'm flying through this, but I want to kind of frame things in your head. Okay. People don't realize there's a difference between requirements documents. Okay. On the most restrictive side, that's your request for quote. Look what they just said, difference between request for quote and request for proposal. Request for quote usually gives you a statement of work. The government knows exactly what they want. What they're looking for is they're looking for pricing, staffing, things like that. They're not really looking for technical solutions. All right. And you'll see you go from RFQ, you can have either a SAL or you can have a PWS. And then we move over to the RFP side of the house, okay, where it's a little less restrictive, okay. And what they'll do is sometimes you'll get a sue. And I talked about the differences below. A statement of work would be paint this tree by the numbers, okay. A PWS say paint me a green tree. So they're giving you a little bit of what they're looking for, but they don't quite know. And then sue is the Wild Wild West. I always call it the Wild Wild West. It's abstract dark. Paint me any tree. Okay. Basically, what they're saying is say, look, we have a business need, and based on this business need, we need a solution. So propose a solution, propose. And typically, when you're responding to a sue, and some of you are going to remember this, you have to produce a PWS back to them. Because what the government will do is take that PWS, take a look at it, validate it, and they'll give it to you in the contract. Okay. So it's important to take a look at those documents. Um, Uniform contract format, we all know this stuff inside and out. Okay, your section L, section M, section C, section H are the most important. Our RFIs or drafts are coming out with C and H, draft C's and H, and you kind of have to kind of figure things out from there. We all want L and M. I need to know what's required of me, how I'm going to respond. It's, when in doubt, section L, and what are the evaluation criteria. And so typically when it's done, you're going to see those things. And I'm just this whole thing is just to show you that it does work. It all fits. Okay. Look, when we're taking a look at the acquisition funnel, we got the contract planning, we got the solicitation itself, we got the evaluation side of the house, we got the contract award, and then we get into post-award. So really, all the things that we've been taught in sales and marketing, and it all fits. Okay. A lot of times we take a look, the government don't know what they're doing. Yeah, they kind of really do know what they're doing. Okay. So I think that's the end of it. Now get into the rules of the game when it comes to orals. Okay. And we talked about this before. Four key attributes that the government is looking for. Leadership qualities of the program manager, competency of key personnel. This sounds like it's intangible, but it's real. How well does that team work together? Okay. And they're actually doing these types of evaluations too. They're taking a look and seeing if their government staff can work with that corporate staff. And they're actually evaluating stuff like that. Evaluation criteria is moving from, something that is ejectable. I had to learn how to say that word, by the way, without spitting. Okay. But those are the ones that we were used to. Okay. Now they're moving into confidence ratings and pass fails. Okay. And confidence ratings, that's interesting. You go, well, wait a minute, that's subjective. Guess what? The way the FAR reads is if they put it in section M, this is how we're going to evaluate you. It's legal. You can fuss all you want, but if it's in section M, they don't have to justify it after that. Okay. A lot of people got frustrated with confidence ratings. Haha, watch this. Then this is a little secret too. Most orals are confidence ratings. So as an orals coach, what's my job? Build you to the point where the government is confident that you can manage the program that you're bidding on. Okay, so you need to look at these things because it does change a little bit of how you deal with coaching your teams. Okay, all right. You see this big old mind map? This is kind of how all my mind. Okay, this is what I told you guys, and you guys didn't hear this. I'm ADD. I got to organize with big pictures. Okay, once I get the big picture, then I kind of understand what it's talking about. But I want to talk about that in your business development world, you're planning your orals. Okay, we have our SWOTs. We do our SWOTs, our strengths and our weaknesses. That's in the qualify process. Remember, in qualify, we're trying to understand. We're trying to answer the question, can we win this work? Okay. During your capture process, you're evaluating the solicitation, you're looking at your key discriminators, your win themes. This is interesting too. When you're in the qualify process, some of you, I wish I could see your hands, but some of you know what a black hat is. Okay. A typical black hat really is looking at okay. In the qualify stage, the first thing we look at is we look at the incumbent. If we're not the incumbent, we're just matching ourselves up to the incumbent. Okay. So you want to be able to determine, is the incumbent weak? Are they not weak? Are they strong? What are we picking up from business development? There's some key differences. If a solicitation moves from one GWAC to another, that's an indicator that there's something wrong. Okay. If they put out the solicitation early, that's an indication that something is wrong. Okay. So these are things you got to pay attention to. By the time you get into the capture process, you're looking at yourself compared to the rest of the competitive landscape. So yeah, we have to assess our discriminators and that type of thing. It's important, although this is business development and capture, it's important because these things go into our slide presentation. Okay, so we need to understand these things. We're going to talk about planning your deck. I think that's the next slide. How you lay out your slides are important. So when we talk about chevrons and compliance, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Color schemes and graphics. You're going to hear me say this. If I ever coach your team, I'll say, do not offend the brain. Okay. A perfect example of offending the brain is you have a color scheme and it's mature blues and mature burgundies or whatever. All of a sudden a slide jumps out and it's chartreuse that offends the brain, okay? And it'll turn your audience or your tab off at that point in time. So I talk about we've all heard about single voice, okay? When we talk about we get our proposals into a single voice, so it looks like one person wrote it. I talk about visual voice, okay? Visual voice is important because as you go through, you're trying to train their brain to look for certain things. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. When you come up to a process slide, they should know this is a process slide. As a matter of fact, by the time they get two or three in, they see that format on that slide, their brain automatically knows what they're looking for. Okay. So think about that visual voice and how we're going to get that. We'll get into the plan to deck in a little bit. Two by four. Ever been hit in the head with a two by four? Ha ha ha. That's my problem. If I ever get out of line, I need a two by four sometimes. But really, this is about capturing the mind, how people learn, how people think. Okay. In thinking, there are basically two types of thinkers. Okay. We won't even get into your introvert extrovert. We'll talk about that later. But either you're a conceptual thinker or you're a detailed thinker, or somewhere in the spectrum between the two. But if, you're either right brain or left brain. That's kind of settled right now. Okay. It used to be two by three. And the four here is how do you learn? Okay. Now I'm going to say this and I'm probably going to spit when I say it because I struggle with the word, but it always, you got visual learners. Okay. You got audible learners, kinesthetic. I think I said that right. Okay. And then you got your rewrites at the end. The last two used to be tied together as they're tactile. Okay. Have you ever heard that word before in college? So the idea is that we're tactile learners. Um, this is important because when we talk about being able to read your audience, you need to be able to walk in right away and find out who's visual, who's audible, and who's tactile. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. And there's dead giveaways. When we talk about reading a room, there's going to be dead giveaways on who these folks are. All right. Proof points and takeaways. We'll talk about that in a second. Right, left brain. I just said that. Acid FedSim guys are all going after a lot of AAS stuff right now. AAS, GSA, there was the fact they had two organizations, FedSim and AAS. They've now combined. It's now called AAS. The government's looking to them as being the lead agent for acquisition. So we all need to kind of understand how that goes. How am I doing on time? I'm gonna keep going. Um, Playing your deck. Okay, well, how you lay out your deck. Um, you got objectives. You want evaluator friendly formatting. Okay, you want narrative cohesion, understanding the solution, execution, and the results. We'll talk about that in a second. Graphic storytelling, presenter cueing, presenter connection. And if it's a scenario, there's a way to address your scenarios. They need to align with your technical approach and management approach. Okay. Some things, if you look on the chart, we do need to talk about. Um, Open up with a bluff. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard the phrase bluff before. It's bottom line up front. Okay. Let me simplify that for you. You got understanding of the environment. You understand the government's or the customer's objectives and their constraints. Here are your key features. Okay. And here are the benefits to the government because of your key features. And basically, in one slide, you give them your solution. Okay. And basically solving it through the features. So what you've done is you've now engaged their mind to be looking at the detail that you're about to give them afterwards. Okay. Process slides. We just talked about that a little bit. Um, help the evaluation board, help the tab, okay? Align your stuff with within the L's. There are going to be some dangling L's that don't get touched in C, but you know what? You need to hit those later, or align your whole deck by L. There's a compliance area at the top typically. Show them where they can check it off, okay? I've done this several times. I put an M slide in. People go, why would you waste time with M slide? Because here are the M, here's how you're evaluating me, and here are bullets of how we address that. So they can just check that off and say you're compliant. Okay. So yeah, how you put your deck together is important. And I go back to make sure you have a sound visual voice that's the same all the way through. Think about your typical left brain, right brain. We talked about that. People are conceptual thinkers. Some people are detailed thinkers. Be able to satisfy both sides. Okay, with a slide. Um, GSA, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. They have a six-pack concept. It doesn't really hold a lot, but they still talk to it. Um, but basically is your technical management approach, your transition phase in. All right, here's a rabbit. It's not a Harvey rabbit, but it's a rabbit. The government's largest risk on any program is transition. Okay. So you got to have a good, sound, solid transition in plan. Okay. I'm going to say this statement and you mark this down, please. Transitions is not about capturing incumbents. It's about capturing knowledge. Okay. Um, and yeah, the knowledge comes from the incumbents, but I watched this happen one time. What happens if the incumbent comes to the government and says, there'll be no transition? I've got work for every one of my people. So what do you think the government sees right away? Risk. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to take a look at your transition plan and go, you know what? I'm going to write this to capture knowledge. There's processes to be able to do that. So if there is no incumbent capture, there's no risk to the government. So think about that. That's a whole nother topic. We can talk about that later. Your innovation, your modernization strategy, staffing key personnel. That's so important. Um, I'll say this too. As a consultant, I supported several people within GSA, so several industry partners within GSA. I was firewalled off from certain things, but I was asked by two of them, can you go in and find out why the same cast of characters seem to be winning this work? So I had friends there. I picked them up, called them, said, look, talk to me after 5:30 when I'm driving home. I said, okay, I called him. Here's what he told me. He goes, Mike, he goes, they give the most brilliant technical approaches. I mean, they just knock our socks off with what they want to do. But then we look at their staffing plan and we know they can't do it. They think we're stupid. So the government's getting smarter about this kind of stuff. So we need to be thinking along those lines of the anatomy of our proposal itself, making sure things reconcile with each other. Quality and risk, there's a big fits and gigs and performance and proof points. Okay. You're going to hear more and more that proof points don't matter anymore. Baloney. That's your evidence layer. You need to have an evidence layer. This is where we've done it before, and there's ways of picking the right evidence, okay, that be able to support your story. All right. Typical FedSim slide. Look, if you ever work with FedSim or AAS, they're very dense, complex slides. Okay. This is what I'm gonna say. The very last bullet on this slide is what you need to pay attention to. Okay. Don't try to narrate the data on the slide. Lift the logic out of it. We call this walk the slide. So you got inputs coming in, you got outputs going out, and just walk that logic, make it make sense to them. Okay. You don't have to hit every bullet. That's not how FedSim thinks. That's not how AAS thinks. Okay. But what they want is they want these slides to be so compact with information that they can go through and say, yeah, they do understand what we're talking about here. Okay. Melissa, am I going too fast? Or slow down? We're doing good.
Nope, you're doing great. We
Awesome.
still
Okay, great.
have, it's only 12:36, so you got plenty of time. We're on to
Awesome.
one.
I did a GSA industry day one time and I went for an hour and 40 minutes. That became the
Yeah.
joke after that. We're going to keep Mike under an hour. So anyway,
No, you're doing
okay.
good.
All right, cool. Thank you. All right. So when we're preparing, okay, now we're getting to obviously, guys, compliance first, convincing that's your proof points, that's your benefits to the customer, compelling. I just said this, make sure your service area, your operational area, your staffing, all that kind of stuff align with each other. They need to make sense and reconcile. And excellence. All right, guys, you'd be amazed at how many times the government runs up against this. Okay. Fight for the right story. Okay. So some people want to tell their story. If it doesn't align with the solicitation itself, then no, you're not telling that story. It's not important. Okay. Your presentation quality is important. Okay. When I talked about visual voice, keep things clean, um, watch your typos, um, uh, gremlins. I don't know if you guys ever heard of the term gremlins when you're doing your proposal, but you love this graphic from a previous proposal and you dropped it into the slide. Guess what? You forgot to change the agency name. They pick up on that kind of stuff. So your excellence is important. And I always look at excellence as a reflection of my company, as a reflection of me. So those are the things that we have to pay attention to. Compliance, convincing, compelling, we all know that kind of stuff. But excellence, sometimes we have a chance. And look, okay, I know my weaknesses. All right. I'm not the one to proof your slides. A proposal manager is someone who's attention to detail. They're the perfect ones to proof slides. I know my weaknesses. I know my weaknesses when I talk, when I'm presenting. Um, that's not my personality. You need somebody who really can go through and watch and find those typos. Simple things. When you're referencing, let's say your deliverables, your Fs, okay? All right, how many times are they in parentheses or how many times are they in brackets? Pick one, stick to it. Make sense? Because if you keep changing, you lose your voice, your visual voice, if that makes sense. So yes, oils preparation, make sure you prepare those slides well. This may mean nothing to you, okay? But if you do a lot of DoD work, the DoDAF, guys have heard the phrase OV1, OV2s, those types of things, okay? There is a reference architecture out there that you can go to. FedSim has their top 10 that they like. That is on this slide. But OV1s used to look like these big battlefield type stuff, but OV1s have actually morphed into what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me, but the idea is it's kind of your operation, your concept of operations. There's a good phrase for it. Okay. It doesn't necessarily look like a battlefield. It can be just basically what's your overall concept of operations. This is where your anchor graphics are going to come from. Try this. When it comes to your anchor graphics, settle that stuff up front first. So this is our anchor. This is what we're going to build the rest of our things. So I'm working on one where the anchor graphic changed every day. And every time they made a change, there was a ripple effect through the rest of the deck. People had to make changes to their slides too, because your anchor graphic is the graphic that we're going to use to help tell the cohesive story. Okay. So try up front to get your OV1 and your anchor graphic down. That is your concept of operations. This is my outline. Look at it that way, my outline for my proposal. Try to get that done as early as possible. Okay. FedSim scoring, I just want to touch on this real quick. What they actually score, what they don't score, but there's a nuance here. I just want to touch on this. Everybody says, "Oh, they're not going to score that slide. It don't need to be. It doesn't need to be there." Wait. People are people. Okay. If I can knock their socks off with an opening slide, I have set their mindset. That was a double double, but you know what I'm talking about. I have now impacted their mindset. If I come out with something boring and bland and we just kind of blow through it and then we finally get into it, their mindset's got to the point where this is going to be boring and bland. It's a nuance, okay? Don't ever be afraid to knock their socks off. On a written proposal, those of you who are writing, your proposal writers, your executive overview. This is what I want. You had me at hello, okay? It's the same way with some of these introductory slides. You had me at hello. I am now ready to hear what you have to say. So don't blow past, or they're not going to evaluate it. That's just dumb talk, okay? Everything you do needs to be impactful, if that makes sense, okay? All right, here's a scoring rubric. This is a lot of data. Like I said, I'll send you guys if I can send this up to you guys can have it. It's fine. It's part of my training stuff. But there's a scoring rubric that FedSim probably follows. Okay, how do you do a FedSim slide? Typically, your first 10 seconds, you're kind of here's the purpose of the slide. Your opening is here's the purpose of the slide. This is what the slide's going to tell you, and this is why it's important to you. Just hit that at the very top. Okay. Figure out what your differentiators are and walk. Remember, we talked about this before. Don't narrate all the data. Walk the logic. This is the logic here. Here are my inputs. Here's my process. This process is going to produce these outputs. These outputs are going to be in my section F deliverables, okay? Or they're going to be outputs to other tasks. That shows the logic of that you thought this thing all the way through, okay? So don't be afraid of Fred Sim. It might have a lot of information inside of it, but you should be able to walk that slide in 60 seconds. And there's ways of doing that, and a good coach will show you how to walk that through, okay? All right, orals practice. This is now we're getting into the real cool meat of this stuff, okay? All right, so I'm going to talk about a couple things. Number one is your presentation styles. All right. We got the memorizer. They're nervous. They have to they memorize everything. I can work with memorizers because they usually stay within their time box and they know exactly what they want to say. The manuscript, they're reading everything. They lose their energy. We want to kind of move away from manuscript type presentations. I've done it before. It's been successful, but manuscript kind of can become, you lose energy. It's the wrong energy. Impromptu. Oh my gosh. I know impromptus because I'm an impromptu speaker. That means I forget the time box, okay? And if one of your speakers is an impromptu speaker and he goes long, guess what? Somebody down the road is going to have to make up for that time because when it feds him, when the KO says time's up, if there are 5 slides at the end that you didn't cover, they get thrown out. They're not even evaluated, okay? Our goal is to get you to the point where you're extemporaneous. I want you to be the expert. When you walk off the floor and when you're done, I want them to say this. We got to have them or we're going to fail. That's what you want to lead them through. It's the same emotional impact as you had me at hello. Okay. So these are things that we coach to. That makes sense? We want to coach to assertiveness. Okay. And this is important too. Sometimes, okay, this is the I win, I lose, you lose, you win, I lose. It's that whole part of passive aggressive, passive, those types of styles. Aggressive comes across this way. I win, you lose. Okay. You're going to listen to me because I'm the smartest one and you're going to lose if you don't listen to me. That's not where we're going. We want to get to assertive. It's the I win, you win. And there's ways to coach your presenters to that green box. Okay. And you see there's sociability and there's dominance. These are all built on top of scales. Okay. And the last one I think is important too is authenticity. You want to be able to connect with your audience. The tab is sitting there. You connect with the tab. You're paying attention to their body language. You're paying attention to, are they getting it? They're not getting it. There's going to be cues when we talk about decoding nonverbals. It's important, okay? But we all want to move to that authentic presenter. You're connecting with the client. I have a kind of a stupid slide at the end, but there's a way to connect and there's a way not to connect, okay? Tools that we use. Okay, we'll do a slide assignment and time tracker. Okay, this is all time math. It took me forever to learn how to do time math on spreadsheets, but we have a time tracker. All the slides are there. Who's the presenter? How much time they have in their section, in the topic, and then we go through as we're rehearsing. We actually capture the timestamps. Okay, that's important because typically they're in the red when we start. But by the time we get to the end, they've been in the green for several practices. Now we're getting into this is my rhythm. This is how I'm presenting the slide. Okay. And this is a good tool that we use to do that. Again, every customer, every client, I just leave it behind because they use this, okay, for other things. Talk tracks, script books. Yes, we coach away from using them, but let me give an example of their value. Okay. I was coaching a team one time. Executive came in. He only had one slide to pitch. Okay. And then one of the executive members. And he came in, he pitched this slide. It was different every time. I can't even remember his name. I said, dude, just write down what you want to say. Okay. Because I need that consistency. I need that that consistent message so that when you pass it off, I mean, you're hitting what you're supposed to hit. They finally did it and they started doing it the same way each time. But script books do that. Okay. Their desired outcome, I hit that part of this is compliance, comforts with the slides. You know what you're going to say, consistent messaging. I just said that. You're managing your time boxes. You should be able to go through this and go, I have 45 seconds for this slide, and you practice it till you get it within 45 seconds. It develops your visual cues. One of the things that I do, if you notice at the top, this is how the brain works. I put a picture of the slide, okay? So what ends up happening is they're beginning to practice this thing. Their brain is remembering that slide. When the brain sees that slide, it knows what it wants to say. So it helps train how they're going to make the presentation itself, okay? And then get your proof points and your takeaways. Anytime you can have a takeaway, this is a benefit to the client, you put that in, okay? Now we get into coaching the team. All right. So now we're getting into orals practicing. That was the rules of the game. Now we're going to get into the orals practice itself. Okay. Remember when you're in orals presentation, your program manager is alpha at this point in time. Your capture manager isn't, your orals coach isn't, your program manager is alpha. This is what I do. As we practice, the program manager takes more and more control over those practices. And me as that coach, I diminish a little bit. I set back. Okay. So what this does, it's how the brain works. I'm going to say it again. Over time, that team begins to look at the program manager as alpha, and there are nonverbals that come out that show that he's in charge. Okay, while they're sitting there, and I think it's important. Typically, we do a couple of script rehearsals. We do a crisis rehearsal. What happens if somebody's not there? Okay, what happens if the laptop breaks? Okay, government don't care. They're basically going to say, hey, this is your time. So we always take two laptops, two projectors, all that kind of stuff. We're going to get in there. We do practice questions. Okay, that is so important because the government, when you're doing practice questions, the government wants to see how that team works together. Okay, that's what scenarios are all about, by the way. A scenario is about watching the team put together their response. Okay, I did one time where we took in 24. Actually, I did it twice. This was GSA Region 3. Up, see, there I go again with my balloons. GSA Region 3, 24 presenters. We didn't know what the topic was. We had to prepare to go in for a scenario. And what they did was they gave us like 6 scenario questions, and then the PM would break them up. Who's got this one? Hey, I'll take that one. And what the tab was evaluating was how that team worked together. Okay. Technical challenges. That's exactly what they're doing. They're seeing how that team worked together. I coached a team with a technical challenge. They didn't finish. Okay. They didn't finish. There was a change in the technology that they weren't prepared for. Guess what? They won. And we went back to them and said, how in the world did they win? How did we win this one? They said, we were so impressed with how good your team worked together. We knew we're safe with you. You got something wrong going in. Okay. But guess what? You adjusted and you almost got there. You just ran out of time. We're good with that. Okay. So yeah, don't underestimate what they're evaluating when your team is in there. Um, Decoding and encoding nonverbals. We're going to get into that. We'll talk a little bit about that. I have some stuff coming up. And situational awareness. You need to be paying attention when you're in there, what's going on. Situational awareness basically is observation, interpretation of what you're seeing, anticipating where your tab member is going, modify your behavior a little bit, and it's continuous where you go right back to the very top. You can observe. Okay. Um, Awareness of audience team signals. We're gonna look at something really quick. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it's important to learn. Okay, I said this today to somebody who was he comes from the psyop world. Okay, that's psychological warfare. Okay, and I said, you know what? I said, when we teach this, 75% to some people say as high as 82, 83% of communications is nonverbal. You respond to nonverbal whether you like it or not. Okay. And there's a key to being able to pay attention to the nonverbal, but watch this. I'm not just decoding nonverbal, I'm learning to encode it. And a perfect example of encoding nonverbals, and it's the simplest example I can give you, is when somebody's making a pitch in their slide, sorry, and they make a point that's a good point you want the government to get, everybody in that table needs to shake their head. Okay. Now there's a thing that's called mirroring. You begin to do this, and all of a sudden you see the tab start shaking her head. You just won that I want to say argument, but you won that point, if that makes sense. So yeah, don't underestimate your nonverbals, what you're decoding, and then what you want to encode back. Okay. You're looking for things like lean-ins and nods. That shows receptibility. Crossed arms, furrowed brows, they're not receptive. Okay, so those are the things that we're looking at. Okay, eyes on a screen show visual learners, tracking content. Heads down, pens moving. Those are your tactile learners. Okay, let me say this: everybody needs to be pay attention when somebody's giving when one of the persons up there giving a presentation. If 4 heads go down and write something, you got a question coming. Okay, that means they're going to want to talk about that later. All right. Here are your cognitive types. We talked about this. Your conceptual thinker, your detail thinker. Here, this is a chart that you can learn on how to basically evaluate. Okay. All right. Fun slide, real quick, and we're getting close to wrapping up this thing. Who's in charge here? You got to learn to read the room. Okay. If you look at that, there's someone who's obviously in charge. Okay. Uh, he's the one who's most relaxed. See his hand is on the table? That's a sign of ownership. Okay. So there's lots of great books out there. Another thing you'll be able to tell is that if he's comfortable, everybody else is comfortable. If he stiffens up, everybody else stiffens up. They're going to be following his lead. Okay. But you take a list. I say, who's alpha? This is a perfect example. Who would be alpha? These are AI generated, so they're not copyrightable, and I didn't steal them from the internet. So I'm safe on this one. Okay. Learn to read the room, totally read the room. I can go through this and I gave you some examples here. You can tell right away who is not receptive. He's got his arms crossed. Okay. You can tell who are visual learners and who are audible learners. Visual learners are looking at your monitor. Audible learners are looking at the speaker. Okay. They're picking up everything that you say. Learn these things. Okay. As you're giving your presentation. Whoops, went the wrong way. Encoding, this is another thing on coding. I'm trying to wrap up, I promise, because I know getting to that time frame. This is my AI mic. Okay. I look so much better under AI than I really do, but this is a very closed style, and this is what I did. Okay. I took this from a picture. The things that show that I'm closed, okay. My lips are kind of crossed. I got a little bit of a furrow. My jacket's buttoned up and my hands are down. Okay. Um, but then you look at this one, this is an open. This is the fake AI mic. Okay. Delivery style is open. My jacket's unbuttoned. See what I'm doing right here? This is a perfect example of how you open up. People could say that you're open. I take my palm and I open it up to the audience. These are simple little things that make a big difference on whether you're going to be received or not. Okay. And these are things that we work on when we're coaching. Okay. Present. All right, we flew through all this, guys. This is a whole class, but this is what I said. I said, listen, when the present day comes, it's just like we practiced. It's no stress. It's just like we practice. I work with the team. I'll give her name a little bit. Her name was Ray. And not a little bit, I gave her name. She was amazing. She was absolutely amazing, but she was nervous all the time and she did great. And you would never have known that she was amazing. And she would say, "Oh man, I messed up." I said, "Ray, you would never have taught, you never could tell that you messed up anything." Well, I wanted to say this. Okay, but they didn't know that. Okay, just relax. And we went, we drilled it. Game day came out. She walked up to me. She goes, "Mike, you were right. I got up this morning. I know exactly what I need to do. You said by game day it was gonna be just like we practice. I'm just gonna do this just like we practice. Difference is I got a suit on. That was the only difference. Actually, I have a dress rehearsal the day before, but that's on purpose. Okay, but yeah, that's it. And guys, when we're all said and done, I'm almost there. We have a retrospective, a hot wash, and what do we do well? What needs a little bit of improvement? And action items. You can always get better, and you've got to look at it that way. I can always do better the next time. Okay. With that, that's me. If you guys need to get a hold of me, and I did that under an hour. Yay, I'm proud of
That
myself.
was great. Thank you so much, Mike. Um,
Okay.
you did have a couple questions. I'll try to get through them in the next couple minutes, but that was amazing. Thank you so much. I know
Yep.
everybody learned something. Um, one question is, how do OTA orals differ from FAR orals?
Okay.
I don't know if there's a short version of that, but
Well, there's a short answer to that. FAR now, the FAR, okay, so FAR is got regulation around it, okay, but GSA has moved into CSOs. You ever heard of CSOs before? Okay, that's
hmm
that's the civilian response to OTAs. Other transaction authorities had to do with rapid acquisition. The DoD got really good about getting things out like this. Okay,
hmm
anything that was FAR based took way too much time. So right now they've moved to CSOs. The only thing about CSOs, they have to be tied to commercially available products, but they
Mm.
can move quickly without having to go through all the rigmarole of an acquisition. There is talk under under the yeah, under the
Okay.
RFO, the FAR
Yeah.
RFO, the move into an OTA possible model. So I don't know if they're there yet, but they're talking about that possibility. Again, rapid acquisition is the way to go right now. Okay. I hope that answered the question.
Yep.
Yep.
Nope. I think you got it. That was for David. What about virtual orals versus in-person orals? Any like key tips on preparing for both?
Yep. Okay. So virtual orals, you can cheat. How's that
Yeah.
sound? Okay.
Wear your pajama pants.
What's that?
Wear your pajama pants.
As long as you got a tie on the top, you're doing good. Typically,
Yeah.
we make you stand anyway. But with virtual orals, a lot of times, folks who are nervous presenters, we can put a script in front of them and scroll it on the screen like a teleprompter. Okay, and I know some folks who are very nervous, and we were able to do that. Basically, roll a teleprompter for them, and it worked. I did one where they sat around. And they did great. I mean, we still practice things like you got to orchestrate who begins to talk, why, where they should be standing, all that kind of stuff. So there's
Hmm.
orchestration that goes on. But that's really the only difference is you can cheat a little bit. The government's getting real good about this too. They used to say nobody else in the room. Okay.
Mm.
Now they say that if we're doing more orals, virtual orals, if somebody's in the room, like a coach or a captured person, whatever, you just have to announce that they're in the room. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. Now, if
Yeah.
you're doing it in person, I try to coach away from, look, there's nothing that says you can't have a script in front of you. There's nothing that really says you can't have your index cards with your notes on top of it. That's perfectly fine. We try to coach away from that, if that makes sense. I'd rather you come across as being confident and know your stuff. That's all. It's the
Yeah.
only thing that takes away from. But yeah, those are
Yeah.
the two differences.
There was a couple questions about preparing for the Q&A.
Mhm.
Obviously that's a big part of what you were talking about, but how can you prepare and what are some of the challenges that you need to get prepped for questions from the customer that you might not be ready for?
Okay. Okay, can I, if I can spend 2 minutes on this, because this is important.
Yep,
This
that
is
this
really,
can be your last one, and
yeah.
we've only missed really one other one, but it goes with this.
Okay. All right. So Q&A, this is what they do. Okay. So there's a couple things. Number one, if something's not clear, they want clarification. That's just duh. They need a little bit of clarification. It's important that they ask that question because it means they're interested. If they weren't interested, they just kind of move on. Okay. A lot of what Q&A does, this is how we prepare for it. We have people who are not part of the team. I'll say this right way, the presentation team craft up practice questions. Okay. And a lot of times when I'm rehearsing, what I'll do is I'll go, government's got a question. Okay. And we'll go through and practice that. What are they looking at? This is what I want. I want the PM to say, I'm going to make sure repeat the question back to make sure I got it right. And I would like to caucus or like to huddle with my team. Okay. They always say yes. All right. Then what you do is you get together, you formulate your response, and the best person to respond needs to respond. They don't want to see the PM respond on every one of them. Okay, does that make sense? So
Hmm.
you want your best. You're trying to make the PM's trying to make his people shine and that type of thing. All right.
Yeah.
Um, don't make a mistake. Okay, Sherry's on here. She remembers this. I don't know if she remembers this, but we were practicing in one of our presentations, one of our oral presentations, and the PM used the term caucus. Okay. And the term huddle. Can I huddle with my team? Can I caucus with my team? One time during practice, she said, can I cuddle with my team? You just got to be careful of that kind of stuff. Okay.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
people, they're going to make those types of mistakes. Remember this, Q&A's got two purposes, clarification. Okay. And they still are evaluating how that team works together. And you have to take advantage of that. Okay.
Yep.
All
All
right.
right. I think the only other question was ideal speaking speed, and then if they're your time tracker, Excel, would you be willing to share that?
Of course. Yeah. And yeah. I'll shoot it out to Sherry, you guys. I think Sherry's got a copy of it, but it changes every time. I make it better every time. So I'll give you the latest version. Okay.
Nice. All
Okay.
right. Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Mike. Did anybody else have any live questions? We're about 1 minute over, but with respect to your time, Mike, if you had a couple of minutes and someone had a
I'm
burning
fine.
desire.
I'm fine. I have to go back to work, so I don't want to go back to work. No,
Yeah.
it's fine.
Same, same. All right. Well, I didn't see anything else. I don't see any hands raised. Thank you so much for your time. That was great.
Thank you. I know I talk fast, guys, but there was a lot of material I wanted to get through. And those of you who are already your acquisition people, you might have rolled your eyes a little bit at acquisition, but some people don't understand how all that works. And that's part of what we try to do is kind of show what goes on behind the scenes, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah,
okay.
no, that was perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and we truly appreciate it. I'm sorry you have to go back to work, and We all do. We're all sorry for ourselves.
That's fine. That's fine. The problem is I'm away from home. I've got another week and a half, and I can't wait to get home. I'm getting home. I'm a Southern Maryland boy, so I can't wait to get home. If that makes
Yay, me
sense.
too.
All
Of
right,
a
guys.
Southern
Thank
Maryland
you
girl.
very much for your
All right,
time. I
see you,
appreciate
Mike.
it.
Thank you. Have a good
All right,
one.
bye-bye.
Bye bye.